Hi, I'm Steve Brown. I want to talk to Irina about my experiences in the Vietnam War. Um, I was a college student. During that time, I got a deferment from the draft, so I couldn't be taken into the Army. And I got out of college. I was a high school teacher. That gave me a draft deferment. That ran out after a year and a half, and I decided to join the Air Force. They said we're only taking pilots, so I said, okay, I'll try that. And I went to Air Force pilot training, and that's a year. I graduated from that in May of '70. Immediately after that, I was assigned this airplane, which is a de Havilland Caribou C-7. It's a tactical airlift. We would haul jeeps, troops, ammunition, barbed wire, mail, ice cream, food, all kinds of things. The beauty of the Caribou was you can kind of see from that picture, it could land on roads, unimproved airstrips. Carried a lot of cargo. It's a great assignment for a brand new pilot in that you were on your own all day. You would go out pretty much in any base in South Vietnam and deliver stuff. That was a great year. The separation factor was that my daughter was born 2 days before I left. I see her again, she's 1 year old. And that was kind of the separation in the Vietnam era. People today in Afghanistan and Iraq have a lot of separation time, but this experience was that we had no communication. There was no Skype, no Instagram, no cell phones. It was strictly mail and occasional HF ham radio splice that was marginal at best. I flew this for a year. I got to come home finally after a year. I went to back to training where I learned to fly. B-52 heavy bombers. I went back in B-52s. We were based in Guam, but we were still flying bombing missions throughout South Vietnam. And then finally in December of 1972, we were directed to fly bombing missions against North Vietnam and Hanoi. Remember, we had a bunch of prisoners of war on the ground at the time, so we were very much aware of that. Wanted to hit exactly what our assigned targets were. For 11 days during Christmas of 1972, we dropped bombs in Hanoi, and that made the North Vietnamese serious about getting together on the peace talks in Paris. And shortly after that, the war for the United States came to an end.
So what were your opinions on the U.S. getting involved in the war?
It was one of those things that we didn't really, I couldn't see the point of it, but I had two choices: either join the military or run away and hide in Canada. And my brother and father had served in World War II and the Korean War, and I had no qualms about serving in the military. At the time, we thought it was a just cause. We thought we were fighting communist takeover of Southeast Asia, when in fact it was probably more like Indochina was a gold mine of raw materials and oil and rubber and many resources that were very valuable in that part of the region, and the U.S. wanted to maintain control of that. The protests, there were a lot of things to protest, but there were many things that the protesters missed the fact that the young men in Vietnam were fighting and dying for what they thought was a just cause. They were told to do that for their country, and they did it. And many, 58,000, some were killed doing that. So the protests, some of which I thought was misdirected. If anybody deserved a protest, it was McNamara and Johnson, who tried to run the war from Washington, D.C., and had no idea of what the generals and the commanders in the field were trying to do. So it was a no-win war. The commander, the Secretary of Defense, acted like it was a political skirmish and they didn't want to win the war. One thing I will tell you, that Because of the protests, the protest movement grew until the end of the war. When we finally came home, we were not welcomed home. We were baby killers. We were all sorts of derogatory terms. And to this day, when a Vietnam veteran sees another veteran with a hat and says Vietnam veteran, he'll say, "Welcome home, brothers." That's the first welcome home we've had.
Let me
Is that
see.
it?
What was your most vivid memory from the war?
You know, being shot at is an eye opener. I was shot at when I flew the Caribou, the small cargo plane. I remember seeing holes in the airplane, and you realize that there's people out there that don't even know me or trying to kill me. When I flew the raids over Hanoi, we were there the first night, the 18th of December, 1972, and we're in 3 ship cells, 1, 2, 3 B-52s. In a cell, there were hundreds of B-52s that came out of Guam and Thailand that flew over the targets in Hanoi. But in our 3 ship cell, I counted 26 SAM. A SAM is a surface-to-air missile, which is targeted to shoot down airplanes. And I saw 26 of them. They'd be launching, and we'd see one come up, another would launch, we'd see it come up, and I said it was body English that helped me avoid them. You could see the launch, there'd be a flash, it was an undercast of clouds, and then the missile would come through the clouds. And as you're moving the airplane, if the missile held still in the windshield, that means it's tracking you. I mean, it's, you turn, it turns, you turn, it turns. And finally, at one point when it's searching, it means you don't have to worry about him anymore, he's not being guided. So the fact that I was shot at and missed is a real eye-opener. And the truly memorable thing about the Vietnam War is the camaraderie. You get to know some guys, some of whom were getting killed. You get to know guys as brothers, and you actually, the camaraderie of those days is something you'll never forget. And it set me up for a career in aviation. I was a pilot for 23 years in the Air Force, and then I was a pilot for 22 years in private jets.
All right, well,
How we doing?
thank you for your time.
Thank you, Irina. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I've known your father for many years. It's great talking to you. How do we do?